So we might begin. I'd like to welcome everyone to Tara Institute this evening, and apologies for not being here last week, and to thank Damien for very kindly and wonderfully stepping in on my behalf. So hopefully things will flow. So I've had a chat with Damien about what points he touched upon last week, so I might be able to embellish those and also cover some new ground as well. As is customary, we're going to commence with a meditation, and the meditation is a single-pointed focus meditation. We're zeroing the mind onto a single object of our choice. And that word zero is quite useful, zeroing in. It's a very precise, decisive mind that's choosing its object. And the object's going to be the breath. And that's a famous object for meditation in many, many traditions, Buddhist and otherwise. And one of the great powers of meditating on the breath as an object is that it's, apart from other things, intimately bound with our physiology. So as we know, when we get agitated or upset, our rhythm of breath changes, often quite dramatically or startlingly. We start to pant or gasp or have a kind of butterfly breathing or a kind of almost hysterical kind of loss of regular breathing if we're really, really tormented in some way. And so the psychology works backwards. If we just simply relax our mind on awareness of the breath and stay with that object without allowing ourselves to get pulled away in any direction by conceptual or sensual objects, we'll find that we'll stabilise on our object. It will become increasingly easy to be there with our object, and as a result, even without having to make any effort, our level of agitation and kind of physical stress, a lot of which is stored in the body, subsides. In other words, it's profoundly relaxing. I use the word profoundly deliberately. It's a different kind of relaxation. It's not the kind of enforced relaxation that we have when we're desperately trying to relax. This is something that's coming about on an organic level. So that's already a major reason to have a regular daily meditation practice. Another very useful component of this meditation is that it trains our mind to become able to be focused on an object of our choice in the course of our everyday. So it alters our sense of concentration, our ability to concentrate. And it also, as we're going to see with the topic tonight, enables us to step aside from particularly difficult states of mind that might otherwise be overwhelming or disturbing, and replace them mentally with a mind that's much more wholesome and relaxed. In other words, we can start to work with our emotional turmoil and problems in a dynamic way using the same meditation techniques. So there's an enormous amount of value to be gained from this technique. One of the common faults that we make when we approach meditation is that we try to strangle the newborn meditation practice by grabbing it by the neck and squeezing it until it can't function. We try so hard to meditate that we kind of crush it underfoot. And so this whole process of projecting onto a meditation and expecting certain outcomes of our meditation, and that's why we've come tonight, because you're going to go away with a meditation that's going to transform your life and you're really glad that you came. This kind of thinking is objectifying and in serious ways over solidifying the kind of open experience that meditation invites. You're quantifying it. in the same way that you might count coins. It becomes like a monetary exercise, a kind of economic exercise. If it doesn't pay dividends, you dump it. You give it 2 weeks, you ditch it. You go and you try something else. You try something else. You try something else. And so this jumping around, trying something else, is a compulsive activity. And it's itself a source of many, many problems. So meditation swings the process around. Rather than clinging to the exterior world and trying to extract the essence from it forcibly, we choose to focus upon our own mind, our own experience, and then begin to see what we can do within that realm. And so it's a radically different focus. And this is another area where misconceptions sweep in, because a lot of people make fun of meditation, thinking that it's somehow a quietistic activity. It's an abdication of social engagement. It's a copping out of being ambitious. It's a kind of failure of the imagination. Only sort of dull people who don't know what to do with their time meditate because they've got nothing better to do. This kind of thinking, in a way, can touch us all at various points in time. And it's really unfair to think that way. It's really not appropriate, because the only benefits that meditation has are the ones that you find through the experience of meditating yourselves. And so within the Buddhist tradition, the meditation techniques are passed down from generation to generation in terms of their experiential lineage. This idea of lineage is actually very, very precious in Buddhism, because it says that you don't just learn a technique because it's in a book or you've read it somewhere or it's in a sutra. You hear the technique and you think about it, and then based on your understanding, you then apply it experientially and then draw your own conclusions quietly and maybe quite slowly. There's no rush here. And then the benefits of meditation become evident over time. So the breath, a lot of people think is a boring object. Does anyone think the breath's a boring object? When I was very ill in hospital, I had a bone marrow transplant for bone marrow cancer, and I became very conscious at my sort of lowest point of that procedure that to even draw breath was a remarkable thing, and to draw another breath was even more remarkable than the one I had just drawn. And so the breath is actually an extraordinary thing, because it's the basis of our life in many, many important and powerful ways. So, having said that, the neutrality of the breath, which is that it's a colourless passage of air in this case, but there's also sensations connected to the flow of that air and an awareness of the flow of that air. It's not weighted or burdened by dogmatic content. You don't have to have an ideological stance in order to meditate on the breath. There's nothing objectionable in the breath that you can say, I don't like that. I don't like the way the breath presents itself to me. I don't agree with it. And I'm not going to have anything to do with that breath. You know, that sort of thinking that preoccupies us so much and dominates most of our thought, it just doesn't apply to the breath. And so that neutrality becomes a very potent thing. But there's a bit of a catch to that neutrality, because as soon as we begin to focus on the breath as our primary object, for many of us, we will have the experience of sinking into a state of kind of sleepiness or dullness. Has anyone had that experience? Yeah. And the ability to clamber back to awareness of the breaths just seems too hard. You seem to be oppressed by the weight, a sort of an inertia that strikes. So Buddhism proposes a really tantalizing explanation of that situation, which is that we are addicted to sensory stimulation. And that addiction to sensory stimulation, I'll demonstrate it. Just a minute. I mean, look at it. I catch the train to the city, and I think 98% of the people on that train are doing this. They're not even looking at each other. There's no social address there. It's this total preoccupation with this portal to stimulation. What kind of stimulation? I've got one. I think they're very handy things to have. But I'm just taking that as an emblem, if you like, of this compulsive crying out for ultimate stimulationness, stimulationability. It's a kind of demand that life provides this for us. And that expectation is foolish, because all we're doing is continually replacing one object of stimulation with another object of stimulation with another object of stimulation. If any of those objects of stimulation were of their own nature completely satisfactory or satisfying, we wouldn't have to keep searching for them. Same way when we're shopping. You know, if the one purchase fulfilled our need, we wouldn't have to make another purchase the same day, even of a similar item to the one we've just bought. So this questing through the senses guarantees a certain level of awakeness, but that awakeness is kind of, in quite important ways, neurotic. It's not healthy. And when we meditate on the breath, we circumvent, we slice straight through that process in a radical way. The very fact that we've chosen to focus on the breath withdraws the energy from our sense operations, our eyes, our ears, our taste, touch, even hearing. We can't operate through those channels in the same way because we're focusing on an object that's very, very subtle, and it's only singular. It's this one thing. And so it's that shutting down of the senses that creates this torpor, this kind of sinking. And so we have to make a resolve when that experience occurs to hold our object, the breath, more firmly, more energetically. Try to use some of the energy that you normally put onto your sensory stimulation into a kind of vivid focus of the object. So that's an invitation. So in terms of this, there are two extremes in this meditation that we'll meet for sure. One is that when we begin to meditate, we'll feel more excited and more agitated than we thought we were, even before we were meditating. Has anyone had that experience? In fact, a lot of people stop meditating and say, oh, actually, I can't meditate. It makes me really tense. I've got friends who say this. They've tried numerous times to meditate, and that just makes them really, really tense. So that is one problem, being overexcited. And then this sinking, this inertia, this dullness is the other problem. And for a lot of us, we oscillate between these two with more or less random kind of ping-pong energy. We don't have a lot of control over what's happening. And so it's very good to know those two extremes exist so that we can identify them in our meditation. And so we have to start thinking of what minds are involved in meditating. So we have a major component of our mind which has got caught up in popular culture, so much so that it's almost exhausted now. It's called mindfulness. It's been thrown around far too much. It's been asked to take on too many roles and too many meanings. In the classic Buddhist presentation of mindfulness, it is referring to the ability to recollect what was in the mind in the immediately preceding moment. This is radical. Mindfulness is a form of memory, because unless we can remember again what we just were holding, we have no ability to carry that awareness of what we were holding in the minute before into the present moment. And therefore we've got no ability to carry that present moment into the next moment in terms of continuity of awareness. In other words, we have no capacity to have a continuity of awareness if mindfulness isn't being applied. So this sort of awareness to remember our object, to recollect our object continuously, gently, continuously, is mindfulness. It will be present. Sometimes we lose mindfulness, and the indication of that is, can anyone tell me, what's the symptom or sign of having lost our mindfulness in our meditation? Yeah. Other things. We literally lose our object. We forget the breath. As you say, we substitute, or we go off and we take another object, and that then dominates our awareness. And so we daydream, we fantasize, we hallucinate, effectively. We just have all sorts of speculations and thoughts and memories and, oh, what am I going to do tomorrow? And did I pay for the credit card from last Tuesday's restaurant dinner? And we're just rambling. And the breath has been lost somewhere in that. So that's a sign that mindfulness has lapsed. It's broken, if you like. So mindfulness has to reconstitute itself continuously. And that we can only get a sense of that experientially by actually doing the meditation, seeing if we can hold the object. So when I say hold the object, I don't mean like hold it so it can't move. I mean to remain in contact with the object. To be aware of the object by continually being with the object as it's appearing. Now there's another aspect of mind which is vital, which operates alongside mindfulness, but not in the same continuous manner, and that's called discriminating alertness. And this is really referring to the ability to check or peep in onto the scene of our meditation and discern whether things are in place. Are they going okay? So this discriminating alertness is a conceptual mind. It's able to see and to reason, to think, yes, this is good, going well, I'll now withdraw, for example. So discriminating alertness enters, it sizes the situation, and then if a remedy is required, such as I'm not meditating on the breath, I'm away somewhere else, it picks up the breath, or picks up the awareness of the breath rather, and returns mindfulness's focus on the breath. So it restores the meditation. And it's very important here to think of this discriminating alertness as a very sensitive and deft, D-E-F-T, like highly, highly skillful, like a soccer player. It can do really elaborate, quick footwork. People can't even see what it's doing, it's so skillful. It can enter the scene of the meditation and leave the other side without even causing a ripple in the flow of our mindfulness. If we overemphasize discriminating alertness, or overplay it, it becomes a form of hypercritical agitation. It becomes a major distraction. So it has to be discreet. And so the analogy is used of peeping. If, say, if there was a spy checking up who would come into the Gompa tonight, and they don't want to be seen, but they just partly open that door and have a peer, a scan of the room, and then quietly withdraw without making a sound. That's a kind of an example of how discriminating alertness will operate. So there's an analogy, a classic analogy here. We need to tether the wild elephant of the mind. And in order to do that, we need to stake the elephant. Not physically, but we need to tie a rope on the elephant and tie it to a stake so the elephant can't move in every direction at will. There's some sort of constraint, in other words. And in order to anchor that rope, we need a place, and that placement is our object of meditation. So the focus on the breath, if you like, is the stake that's holding our wild elephant mind from wandering. And even then, the elephant can get up to a lot of mischief. It might not have been domesticated or tamed. So there'll be an elephant tamer who will use a goad, a stick, to prod the elephant when its behaviour is not appropriate, or to reward the elephant, perhaps, if its behaviour is very, very good. And that's equivalent to discriminating alertness. And so mindfulness becomes the rope holding us to the object, and the goad, if you like, the stick, becomes discriminating alertness that redirects and kind of skillfully engineers the taming of the elephant. So these are all vital components. If we leave any one of them out, our meditation will fall to pieces, or have an indefinite effect. So let's do the meditation. So first of all, we become aware of our bodies just as they are. This involves extracting ourselves from the day's activities. All of the extraneous affairs of our busy lives can be put aside, at least for now. Instead, become aware of our body, just as it is, on this spot. We might like to just spend a moment aligning our posture to make it more conducive for meditation. So the principal aspect of this is the spine. So if we're slouching, it's very difficult to have a clear mind while meditating. So feel that the vertebrae is in a vertical position, with each segment stacked upon the next, as we might a vertical single pile of coins, so that it doesn't topple. So we can actually rotate the torso a little bit on our hips, just finding that point of focus. Or if we're in a chair, we might want to slightly rearrange our position. When we get to the shoulders and the neck, it creates stress if we have the spine in a vertical position, so we ever so slightly tuck the chin towards the chest, not so that it's touching, but just enough to take any undue strain from the top of the spine. We'll know this intuitively. It feels comfortable. Check that the shoulders are level. There are different traditions for hand and arm postures in meditation, but for the sake of this meditation we can rest the right hand in the left hand, palm of the left hand, with the tips of the thumbs touching at about the point of the navel. And have the arms slightly out from the torso. So we're not clenching, squeezing the body with the arms. They're relaxed. Moving to the face, particularly the jaw. Just letting go of any tension. The tongue also. So the teeth shouldn't be clenched. So just let go of any kind of anxious grip in the jaw. And we can either have the eyes open, peering down the sides of the nose to a point about 1 metre away, or partially open, just allowing light to enter, or shut. But if they're shut, we have to be particularly aware that this can become an inducement to sleepiness. So now become aware of the breath as it's flowing in and out from the body. And just for a few moments we can let go of any of our physical or mental problems, anxieties, illnesses and so forth. With the out-breath, just feeling that all our problems tumble out in the form of smoke that rolls away and dissolves. Then, with the immediate in-breath, radiant light pours into our body and mind, releasing, soothing, relaxing. So do this for a few moments on our own. If there's a whole lot of thoughts happening, we can let these go with the out-breath as well and inhale a clear, open state of awareness, not cluttered with thought. And now, because we're doing the meditation from a Buddhist perspective, we spend a few important moments framing the motivation for the meditation ahead. We don't have to be Buddhist to actually do this motivation, but it's from a Buddhist perspective a vital part of the meditation. In other words, we feel that we're not just meditating for our own sake, our own purpose, but so that we might be able to be of benefit to others, better able to support and help those around us, especially those who depend upon us. If we're not looking after ourselves in a sensible way, we're incapable of looking after someone else. So there's a sort of responsibility there. But the overall purpose of the responsibility is to open ourselves out to a commitment of working for the benefit of the greatest number of beings imaginable, not just this one I sitting here, me. So we can do this motivation in conjunction with the four immeasurables. May all beings without exception have happiness and its causes. So really feel this from the heart. How wonderful it would be if all beings without exception had happiness and its causes. May I, the meditator, be able to bring this about. Please, precious Buddha, inspire me thus. And here we can substitute any other sort of object of virtue from our own tradition, or if we're not looking at it from a religious or theistic point of view at all, we just feel that may we inspire ourselves with our own best nature, our own best potential, our own best practice. Second immeasurable, how wonderful it would be if all beings without exception were freed from suffering and its causes. It's not hard at the moment, is it, to acknowledge how many beings are suffering in very severe ways in war zones around the world. So this isn't an abstract thought at all, it's a real contemplation. May they be free of suffering and its causes. May I, the meditator, be able to bring this about. Please, precious Buddha, inspire me thus. Again, feel a wave of energy, enlightened energy, instilling this thought at the very deep basis of our mind. May all beings without exception abide in equanimity, free from holding some close and others distant. How wonderful this would be. May I, the meditator, be able to bring this about. Please, precious Buddha, inspire me thus. How wonderful it would be if all beings without exception achieved only higher rebirths and the supreme bliss of liberation. So here we're thinking of both temporal and ultimate happiness, or greatest imaginable happiness. Not just short-term, but enduring happiness. How wonderful this would be. May I be able to bring this about. Please, precious Buddha, inspire me thus. So now just very gently, delicately, precisely, alight our awareness upon the breath. Merely observing the breath as it comes and goes. So we're aware of the beginning, middle and end of an in-breath, beginning, middle and end of the out-breath. And just as importantly, the beginning, middle and end of the space between. In this way we're aware of all the moments of the breath in a gentle, continuous fashion, So we ride the breath as might a leaf the breeze. Wherever the breath goes, our awareness of the breath goes, not losing contact for even a moment. So we're not controlling the breath or visualizing anything, we're simply being aware. That mind of discriminating alertness I described earlier needs to be invoked from time to time. So just check, is the mind upon the breath? If it is, we quietly withdraw and continually being mindful of the breath. However, if it's wandered, if it's forgotten the breath, we need to restore the object and then resume the meditation. We don't chastise ourselves or have a conversation about how hopeless we are as a meditator. All of this is just extraneous, conceptual chatter, irrelevant to the basic task of the meditation, which is bare awareness of the breath. Just checking. Is the mind upon the breath? If we're starting to flounder a little and thinking what's going to happen next or nothing's going to happen, this is all just expectation, conceptual activity. So with discriminating alertness, we simply dismiss this activity and return to the breath. Now for the last few moments of the meditation, see if we can enhance the quality of our awareness of the breath. Being aware of the breath more vividly. still need to apply discriminating alertness from time to time. Now we can let go of the breath as our main object, so this portion of the meditation is completed. But rather than just rush back to an ordinary awareness of ourselves in the room, just spend a moment acquainting ourselves with the sensation of a resting body. Perhaps it's the first time in the day that we've actually sat in a resting body. We drive ourselves very hard. So just allow ourselves to be present with the relaxed body. And now we can quietly become aware of the room again, our surroundings. If the eyes are being shut, we can open them. So are there any comments or thoughts or observations that anyone would like to make? Did anyone get bored? Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Yep.
Can I ask a question, sort of comment question? I find like the physical positioning difficult
Yeah.
to, and then sort back this,
Uh-huh.
that becomes a bit of a
Distraction for you.
distraction.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've got any comments to speak to that other than just,
Yeah, there are different sort of approaches to this issue of the body being a distraction and postural sort of difficulties too. And then for various reasons, some of us do suffer from pain and various physical ailments, even severe illnesses and so forth, that become very apparent when we begin to meditate. So I tend to feel that it's not a matter of being too rigorous in having to have a classic formal posture. It's more important that you do feel relatively comfortable so that you're not completely distracted. In some of the Zen traditions, you're asked to sit for an hour without moving, even through the threshold of the most unimaginable physical pain, which sort of begins to arise, because normally we're fidgeting and we realign, rearrange our bodies all the time because we're feeling discomfort. We fidget. It's called fidgeting, isn't it? And people, we can be really, really fidgety, and suddenly we're not doing that. And so it's almost like the inner stresses of the fidgeting body are still active, even though the outer body appears to be stationary. That's why when I look at everyone meditating, I know that half of you aren't meditating. I mean, you look like you're meditating, but I don't know what's going on in your minds. You can adopt the posture, but it doesn't mean you're meditating. And by the same token, you can have a posture that doesn't look like a meditation posture and be meditating. So it's good to sort of get that sense of what a meditating mind is like. And if you've got a physical problem and you can sit in a way that relieves it, then certainly start with that. And then as you become more accomplished or acclimatized, you might find it becomes less of an issue. There's a sense in which the body is going to throw up 1,000 spectacular distractions no matter whether we have pain or discomfort or not. It just has this ability to set up a dialogue with us that becomes very demanding. So, I've had experiences, I'm sure we all have, of becoming fascinated by the tingling in my left knee. It's not my right knee, it's the left knee. It's absolutely fascinating. And I forget that I've got the rest of the body. So I sort of have knee consciousness pervading my meditation because I've allowed that object to be amplified through allowing that focus to remain intact. So in the same way that we withdraw from a sensual object, such as listening to a sound, whether someone's driving their car in, or are they going to park next to mine? Wait a minute, I'm meant to be meditating, I'm meant to be inside watching. In the same way, we can use the body as a kind of an orchestra to play with in meditation, as a distraction. So it will throw up any number of distractions. Other people have another problem, which is their creative minds start to spin out these kaleidoscopic narratives of the most splendid detail that make an HBO serial look lame. And that's just another manifestation of this elaboration of detail. It's almost like we can't bear not to be elaborating detail. And so in other words, we can be over-emphasising how serious or important the body is. So simply go back to the breath. Does that help? Yeah. Some people are in chairs too. I don't know if you've experimented. You don't have to be sitting sort of cross-legged. And we run a healing workshop here too, and some people for various reasons, medical reasons, meditate lying down. And again, that's, wonderful. It's easier to go to sleep lying down, especially if you've got a cushion under your head. So just be more aware that you're not going to go to sleep, but otherwise just relax. It's said not to be that wise or clever to meditate in bed for that reason, because it just takes a little bit of a tilt backwards and we're kind of in bed again. So for that reason, in Buddhism we have a kind of often a ritual connected to meditating. So we'll have a special space, a special spot, for example, set aside, or we create it for our session. And that ritual of laying out the spot, even if it's a special cushion that we keep in a cupboard, we only bring it out, the kids can't play with it, the dog can't sleep on it, it's our meditation cushion. It's very precious, that cushion. So when we take it and put it down, we're signalling to ourselves symbolically that we're about to engage in something that's very important and special. So you can see with all these details in the Gompa here that the rituals always have this psychological component to them. They're not just there because we're somehow worshipping an exterior object. It's a way of composing the mind and preparing the mind for the meditation. Any other thoughts or? So I might sort of jump into my topic a little. I'm going to quote from the Dhammapada first of all. Mind is the forerunner of all disturbing conditions. Mind is chief, and they, disturbing conditions, are mind-made. If, with an impure mind, one speaks or acts, then pain follows, even as the wheel, the hoof of the ox. Mind is the forerunner of all positive conditions. Mind is chief, and positive conditions are mind-made. If, with a pure mind, one speaks or acts, then happiness follows one, even as the shadow that never leaves. So this is a very beautiful stanza, and in very important ways encapsulates our task as meditators, if you like, intent on living well, living the best possible way that we can imagine. So often Geshe Dogra, our resident Tibetan teacher here, says that we are the friend of ourselves and we are the enemy of ourselves. And this is getting at exactly the same point. Whether we're experiencing happiness or unhappiness has to do with how we're utilising the mind. Is our mental approach constructive or destructive, or a murky mixture of both? Part of the task as a Buddhist meditator is to begin to extricate that muddle, tear that muddle apart and start to see more clearly the causality, if you like, involved in the way in which mental states are being generated within our mind, and the ways in which we can begin to work with the content of the mind and even transform the content of the mind in very, very productive ways. And so His Holiness the Dalai Lama says that all this sounds very good, but the mind is very peculiar, he says. Quite peculiar. Sometimes it's very difficult to change and very stubborn. So this sense that the mind is very difficult to change and very stubborn is itself the product of a preconception about what our mind is and how it works. So Buddhism is going to propose in a very intriguing way that if we're continually producing a certain problematic state of mind that's having consequences, it will seem as though that mind, that disturbing mind, was our actual nature, the actual essence of our mind. We over-identify that experience with ourselves, in other words, and take them to mean exactly the same thing. And this is a complete misreading of the situation. So from a Buddhist perspective, we say that if there are the causes and conditions for a particular mind to arise, it will arise. And if there aren't the causes and conditions for a particular mind to arise, it won't arise. And this is because the mind itself is a conditioned phenomena. It's conditioned because it's subject to causes and conditions. If it wasn't, it would be permanent, absolutely fixed in its nature and its character, and totally impervious to any influence or circumstantial impulse or change. In other words, it wouldn't matter what we did, our mind would ride on with that nature, that relentless, problematic nature, regardless of anything we did, because it would be cut off, dislocated from the intricate network of causes and conditions. It can't be cut off because it's a causal phenomena. The mind arises from moment to moment in a continuous stream. That little baby mind, cute that it was, at one point, we'd be held in one hand, perhaps, a small baby. That little being who was my own former self had a mind which is an earlier moment of the continuum of this current mind. Isn't it? And the body's changed a great deal, but that's had its own sort of continuity as well. It hasn't remained the same because it's also a causal phenomena. It's conditioned. It's interdependent with its environment and circumstances and so forth. But there has been a kind of a foundation there of continuity in which experiences have arisen and dissolved, arisen and dissolved. And so even the most problematic states of mind, which seem to be overwhelming and even obliterate our sense of hope or purpose in life, are, technically speaking, temporary phenomena. They can't be sustained. This is a really, really fascinating point to consider. So the Dalai Lama says, with continuous effort and with conviction based on reason, our minds are sometimes quite honest. When we really feel that there is some need to change, then our minds can change. Wishing and praying alone won't transform the mind, but with conviction and reason based ultimately on our own experience, you can transform your mind. And so there's a call here to be both very practical in approaching this situation and also very clever. Because the cleverness comes into identifying the causes and conditions that will bring about a beneficial state of mind, and will also be very clever in recognising the causes, conditions that bring about a negative or disturbing or destructive state of mind, and maybe some neutral minds falling between those two extremes as well. So it's said that if we explore this and begin to generate positive states of mind in dependence on generating the causes for positive states of mind, for example, they will arise increasingly more easily as we go forward. So this is a very inspiring thing to think about. So there's an analogy here, a classic analogy, which is that if we're training the body, for example, in long jump, we can only jump so far, no matter how hard we train. And the reason for that is, apart from our own individual prowess as an athlete, is that there is a kind of limit built in to what this particular human physical body can do. Just trying to. I was just conscious of the woman who just won the marathon. Follow that story. She just broke the world record of the 2 hours for the 10-kilometre marathon. It seemed to be impossible, to break that, and she's managed to break it. But she only broke it by 20 seconds. So there's a kind of incremental loss occurring as we reach the pinnacle of our humanoid athletic potential. Maybe we'll be supplemented with android implants and various sort of robotic prostheses and so forth that will enable us to jump further in the future, but that's really taking us away from our topic. The mind doesn't have that same limitation. So the reason the Dalai Lama mentions the role of reason here is that if we base our state of mind or our production of a state of mind on a valid foundation, it's said to be able to be increased indefinitely, without limit. And so an example of a mind like this is love and compassion, for example. There's said, from a Buddhist perspective, to be no limit to the potential of developing those very, very special minds. However, there is a limit, you'll be glad to hear, to developing the mind of hatred, even if it manifests in the most grotesque, ugly, Trumpian intensity. You didn't hear that. It's that face, isn't it? It reveals a certain invective, a mental vehemence that's literally spat out of that little round mouth, acting as a kind of force, isn't it? That's meant to somehow resound around the world because he's so important. And I'm not picking on him, it's just fascinating how tricky that man is to like. He's a real challenge from a Buddhist perspective, because we're not meant to leave anyone out of our love and compassion. And we have our limits. Mine are Dutton and Trump. They are. I find them really hard work, both of them. Anyway. So understanding more deeply this potential, or the inability of hatred to be developed infinitely, why is that? It's because hatred is dependent on superimposing a false degree of ugliness or unpleasantness onto an object through the force of what we call in Buddhism delusion, a distorting thought. And then we read back that object that's now laden with our superimposed projection of ugliness as an actual statement of the quality of that object itself. So, I mean, I'm not being philosophical here, really. I'm trying to be very practical. If we have a problem with immigrants, for example, or people of a certain race, or even, dare I say it, certain skin colour, i.e. we're racist, that's exactly what we're doing. We're projecting a sort of state of affairs from a negative, discriminating mind, implanting it on that person, and then reading them back as somehow intrinsically objectionable. They become objectionable because of what they are. It's no longer got anything to do with me constructing it, thanks very much. I'm not racist. It's just really difficult having people coming from that part of the world because they're really, really not very nice people, and off they go in a racist rave. And so they've objectified their projection, believed in their objectified projection, and then respond accordingly. All of that from a Buddhist perspective is based on a kind of hallucinating mind. Because that exaggerating process that's happening is happening to happen over and over and over again. Every time a racist comes into contact with their object of their racial hatred, they have to reconstitute their hatred towards that object as it's appearing. And they do that relatively swiftly and effectively if they're really racist, because they've done a lot of this ugly footwork previously. So they merely had to glimpse a certain skin colour or whatever it is that they're basing their objectional views on to get the full impact of their racist mentality operating. And so it's a way of controlling the way the world's appearing to that person. They're filtering, they're distorting, they're in a real way damaging their ability to embrace what's actually there. They're cast off from reality, in other words. And so Buddhism is going to say that if, for example, we find someone repulsive, because it's easy to say, oh, racists are bad, but we might be having a real battle with someone in our life, a particular person, in other words, who we're finding really, really unbearable. And to merely hear them cough will send us into a spin dive. I was having problems with someone at one point, and I fixated for whatever reason on the way the soup spoon struck the front lower teeth. It epitomised everything that was wrong in the relationship. It was a resounding, unbearable sound that seemed to recoil and sort of shatter my equilibrium at the deepest level. That's loopy, absolutely loopy. But it's exactly the same mechanism in play. So Buddhism says if we can subtract that degree of exaggerating projection, we have an opportunity of re-perceiving the object, recognising reality. In fact, cognising reality for the first time in an important way. And so the actual qualities of the object can appear to us. You can see who's there, literally see who's there. I can tell a story about my dad because he was he's passed away, so I perhaps wouldn't tell the story otherwise, but he was of the generation that he fought in the Second World War. He was a fighter pilot and he dropped bombs from his little plane on jungle villages. And anyway, there was a lot of parts to this story. My sister, younger sister, fell in love and married a Zimbabwean man who was here as a student at Monash University in the glorious days of Mugabe's first moments of sort of freedom fighting. And so, it was a utopian moment. So my father sacrificed a relationship, it sounds like I'm being judgmental here, I'm telling a story, sacrificed a relationship with his daughter and didn't share in the grandchildren who were happening overseas, all because he had this preset mechanism that said that anyone from Africa was bad or weren't to be inside my house. It was this exclusive mechanism, virulent in its clarity and profoundly resonant in its implications. It pervaded not just his relationship with my sister, but you can imagine, our entire family, because we could never be together as a family. And I'm going to tell a good part to this story. For various reasons, due to the political sort of intensification in Zimbabwe, as sort of things went off the rails, my sister decided to return to Australia with her 2 young sons. And for various reasons, her partner decided not to come. And so she returned to Australia after all those years away, feeling very vulnerable. She had had a career in Zimbabwe, can you believe this, with Morgan Gallup polls, which was the most dangerous job to have in a sort of totalitarian regime, which Zimbabwe was becoming. So she was actually living in fear of her life. She had a friend whose kid had been imprisoned on a false charge to get to the mother. So anyway, it became very political. So she rescued her kids and came to Australia, and then turned up in Yarrawonga in northern Victoria with these 2 beautiful boys. And my father was confronted with the reality of these boys being his grandchildren. And within days, my father was to be seen proudly parading these boys in the shopping centre of Yarrawonga to much local acclaim, because everyone came out and said, what beautiful children, what's their story, and so forth. And so he was there telling them proudly about everything. So everything kind of swung around. And on his deathbed, he told a story which he had never told before. He said that on one occasion, when he was about to drop the bomb, he looked down into the jungle and a white row appeared on the ground, and then another row appeared, bisecting it, i.e. it was formed a white cross, and there was a little hut, the little hut that he was about to drop the bomb on, and he realised that it was a school, and he didn't drop the bomb. The fact that he told that just before he died, in one way was an incredibly sad thing to hear, but it also opened a window into the trauma of war for that man, and that he hadn't communicated or found a way to communicate that pain, that moral pain. He was 17, 18 when he went to war. They used to lie about their ages to get conscripted. He wasn't even formed, and he became, a fighter pilot. And so I was also required, from my side, apart from the fact that I was pretending to be a Buddhist, I had to rethink my father too. We all have to keep rethinking in other words. That we're all the time trying to concretise and objectify and solidify and all these things I've been talking about, except that our projections are in fact real ones. We had a fight with someone 4 years ago based on a particular argument. We're still basing our relationship with them on that particular argument. We can't even talk about that argument. It was so difficult and it was unresolved. It can't be resolved. Things have just gone underground, but they're still active. All the problems are still there. They've never been addressed. Look at the power of that situation. It's just ridiculous. And so Buddhism says take the situation inside, take the relationship with my father, for example, inside, and investigate those things together inside the framework of the meditation. So we're going to do these sorts of meditations over the next few weeks to explore, both sort of positive ones and ones that are a little bit more challenging, to show that meditation can also operate in what we might call a therapeutic mode, to transform attitudes and biases, and particularly ones that are blocking us from ourselves, because interestingly enough, one of the worst victims of our own processes of objectification is me. How often have we reached a threshold in our life we think, oh no, I can't do that. I'd love to do that. I see other people doing it, but I can't do that. I just can't do it. I'm hopeless in that particular area of life. I can't succeed. I'm really sad about it. So it becomes a kind of melancholy, really, to do with our own failure. And that melancholy is predicated on a belief that we're the way that we've constructed ourselves to be through a misconstruing of what's actually here. So Buddhism goes right to the basis and says, at least literally, what is here? There's a body. My body. My body is not your body. Your body is not my body. So it's relative. This one is relatively my body to me. I have a certain obligation to this one, because it's the basis of my life in this moment. So I have to be responsible for it. And what's here also is a mind. And this mind isn't your mind. And my mind isn't, so we can't transfer minds unless we're watching Body Snatchers or something on telly. And there's also a person here who's not you. And that person came into this gompa and sat down and is doing its thing and will stand up and go out. And that won't be you, because your person is sitting with you. You're you, not me. And so this sort of basic foundation becomes the material to begin to explore in meditation. Because if we direct our attention onto our mind, for example, and begin to work through the layers of our preconceptions about what the mind is, we can reach apprehensions of being, if you like, of potential that are way beyond the kind of narrow historical storytelling or narrating to do with some tight, constricted view of me. We start to open out beyond the confines of the ego story, if you like. So it's very therapeutic in that way too, because it releases us from the strictures of our own constructed preconceptions of our limitations. And so, has anyone here ever had any self-denigration? Just about 2 or 3 people. Really interesting, isn't it? Self-denigration, how it operates and what it means. And so Buddhism says every being is precious and every being is equally precious. There is no foundation for self-denigration in that idea of radical equanimity, radical equality. So let's finish the session there, and we'll just spend a moment giving away any of the energy of this short time together. Just to begin to contemplate some of these things is already very, very precious. Gives us tools, perhaps, to begin to search and reveal things. So we do this from our own side, using reason, as His Holiness said. We're not trying to force beliefs or control thought. We're inviting speculation, creative investigation. And the purpose of this is to be able to fulfill the needs of all other beings, bringing happiness and freedom from suffering. And with that we conclude the meditation. So thanks very much.